Great. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today, all the way from Texas, United States, I've got Joseph Young. Joseph, you're the founder and director of Kuvio Creative, which is website and app development. We'll dive deeper into what you guys do. That's just a really brief thing. But before we get into that, let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
So my virtual office is a very specific place in my house that I like to go to. I am surrounded, being a developer, by 3 monitors that basically span my entire workspace. I mean, I'm looking at the periphery now and all I can see is monitors except for about this much area. But other than that, the entire workspace is sparse. So I have a desk that is beautiful black walnut desk that I invested in a long time ago that is sort of my joy to sit down on, right, and go to work at. And it's always been that joy for very many years. And so it sort of anchors the room. And but on top of the desk, I have nothing except for a stack of paper to take notes on as they enter my head, and a picture of me and my girlfriend, and that's it, nothing else. And so it's this weird combination of as sort of sparse as possible and information everywhere, right? Being surrounded by monitors where you have that flexibility to just have information basically surrounding me. And that's the best way that my personal brain works.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, indeed. So a very sparse desk, but an information-rich 3-monitor
Yes.
hub
Exactly.
from which you drive the spaceship. Yeah. And so why 3 monitors? You know, most people have 1, some have 2. Why 3?
It's interesting because there's sort of a natural pattern with the coding experience. So typically my code will be sitting in the middle of in my monitor right in front of me. And then to one side, I'll have documentation about the particular code that I'm working in, or some other reference points, basically a browser with multiple tabs open. And on the other side, I have the actual application that is running for the code, right? And so the monitors sort of become a split of those 3 different angles, where now it just becomes a head turn whenever I'm ready to ingest some other piece of information. So I look over here for information, and then I put it into code, and then I look over here to see the results. And it becomes more of a head turn than a switching inside of a particular monitor. And that's worked best for me.
So basically you have things in 3 different phases. So you've got like the documentation. So as you're coding, as you're doing stuff, you're documenting what you're doing and thought processes, I'm assuming. And then on the other side, you've got like, okay, what does this application look like? After you've compiled and run it, then you can actually see. And so it's all just sort of, and on 1 monitor, just not enough space?
Yeah, just not enough space. And I like white space. I'm a huge fan of white space. And so even code has to have lots of margin around it so that, it sort of, in a weird way, gives my brain space to think, the more white space there is and compartmentalization that there is.
How long did it take for you to find a really productive setup for yourself? Like, did you go through a bunch of iterations, or was it just like, I know what I need, sit down? I mean, how did you find a productive workspace?
It was, I would say, very much driven by the combination of the frustrations of starting with a single monitor, right? And so with a single monitor, you end up task switching, and so you end up being able to see only one thing at once, right? Or you have a bunch of windows everywhere, and taking enough time to listen to those frustrations and figure out what it was that made me personally frustrated about them, and figure out, what does that mean? Does it mean that I work better when things are spread more open and compartmentalized, when there's more space, when there's more focus? And then it grew from a 2-monitor setup, which was strange to me because there was no primary focus, right, to the 3-monitor setup where there is a primary focus and then there's sort of secondary information. And that's sort of how it grew over time, is just taking enough time to personally listen to the reason why I would get randomly frustrated by by not being able to adequately, efficiently solve some grand problem that I was undertaking.
I really like that. I really like the idea, the concept of listen to your frustrations. Sometimes it's really little. It's like, I just hate pushing that button every time. Well, figure out a way to not push that button every time.
Right.
Kind of thing. But I mean, I ask this specifically because I find that, especially in the COVID days, you know, everybody's been forced to work at home or forced to work in a place. And I think people underestimate how long it can take to actually figure out your own productive workspace, or how, well, what it is exactly that you need. You know, like when we're in an office, we're kind of given sort of a setup and the equipment that we're going to use, but at home, sky's the limit. You know, you could get one of those fancy gaming chairs and like the best, you know, you can kind of go crazy. So it's, in a way, it's hard to figure out what it is you need personally to be productive. So that's why I dive into that. And I really like the listen to your frustrations part.
Yeah, and give yourself enough time as well to try different experiments. You know, I mean, building your workspace, especially if you're trying to transition into a remote environment, it's important to not rush it, because you're jumping into a new environment if you've never been remote that you've never been in before, and so you need to give yourself enough space to run these different experiments and figure out what feels best for you, you know. And it's a very vague thing to chase, but you'll know when you get more perfect than what you had before. And even with me, it's an ongoing process. You know, there are things that still frustrate me. I'm not like some, you know, magic person who sits down and I have everything that I need and, you know, I can work on a 24-hour day and just be perfectly productive. It's never going to be that, but it can always be just a little bit better than it was.
I interviewed a guy a while back, Michael Slawinski, and he does a review of his workspace every year, like a retrospective about what's working and what not. And just like once a year, he tears his whole office apart and puts it right back together. You know, sometimes it's sort of the same, but I really like that idea. Like, oh, I never did that. So that's fun. But okay, let's dive into your company and what you guys do. I gave sort of a botched intro, but you're the founder and director of Kuvio Creative. And I wrote down here branding, web design, marketing, basically website and app development. But what struck me about your company is you said you're a 100% remote company and you've been 100% remote from the start. So start by telling us a little bit about the company and then why you started it and why you started it remote. So it's 3 questions in one, but we'll get there.
Yeah, so the company started out with my personal background being as a web developer, being primarily about software, but it also started out being about well-designed software, because I always thought that most software agencies got that wrong and that they didn't pay enough attention to design, which was the thing that users experience, right? They don't experience the back-end code, they experience the front-end interface. And so I originally started the company with a designer to try and build a different way of building software that was very design focused. But that became a slippery slope to, well, if you have this app that you're building, you also need a decent marketing strategy to build it. And you also need a good brand, which is different from the design of the app, right? But it's very correlated. And you need a general operational strategy for how to continue to operate your internal process to make this app a growing thing. And I started noticing that all of these things that we were building internally became the same subset of things that you would need as a business if you were also trying to embark upon an entirely new route of things, right? You can't just hire a branding team and be like, here's your logo, bye, see you later. You have to incorporate with everything else, with marketing and with website, a revamp of your web presence and everything like that. And so then it became very interesting to me to solve that overarching problem and sort of be there for businesses that are ready to do something big and go in a different direction with everything that they needed from a talent perspective to actually pull it off. And so they provide like their industry expertise and we partner together to build the brand and the marketing and any internal tools or external tools for their customers and things like that actually can pull off the idea that they have in their head. And so,
no, go ahead.
And so that's how it sort of moved. The reason that I started the company was that my couple of experiences in a more traditional software field, just being a software developer in a larger company, I was noticing many of the issues of my industry, right, of software. Like, why am I having to commute into an office for 8, 9, 10 hours a day? And in that time, it was a 1-hour commute each way, right? And so it was 10 to 12 hours of my workday. For the sake of going into a cubicle and talking to people for maybe 5 minutes of that day and socializing with them, but mainly just kind of trying to figure out a way to work, why did I have to be there to do that? Like, what was the point of me having to commute to this place to sit down in front of a computer and be able to do that? And it frustrated me more and more, because it's not that I wanted everybody to be remote, it's that I started realizing that that was not the environment for me, and wondering why we didn't have more flexibility to find the right environment for us that ignited our passions in the best possible way. Because I didn't understand why sort of forcing that environment onto people would be the best path to productivity and to business success, right? Because the sum of business success is the sum of everybody's productivity, right? And the way that you interact as a team. But if you're putting everybody into the same schedule, into a gray cubicle, next to each other, just for the off chance that Bob has to talk to Susan for 30 seconds a little bit later, you might be missing out on the natural rhythms of the people that work for you, and thereby missing out on sort of igniting the passions in a more natural way instead of forcing things. And so it eventually got enough that I was like, you know what, I feel like I could, in the random entrepreneurial way that most people do, I feel like I can do this better. Let me go out on my own. And so I did that. But that's why I started it with the approach of, let's just do everything as absolutely opposite as we possibly can to see what the results of these experiments are. And so we from the beginning, like you said, we've been 100% remote, and by force we've been 100% remote. Like, I mean, so that we could be forced to solve the problems that come about being 100% remote from the beginning, right? Is it's not all birds and and
yeah. Umbrella drinks on the beach. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. There are really hard problems to solve, but you don't solve it by having also a slippery slope into well, we ran the remote experiment and it's been hard, and so let's go back to getting some real estate and having an office. So we tried to stay 100% remote, and found that it for at least for the team that we have, had just substantially more benefits than downsides. We also did an experiment from the very beginning that was also a rebellion against my industry of, we are a 30-hour full-time work week, no more. Overtime, overtime is unheard of. Overtime is anything above 30 hours, but it is very important to me that everybody stays at that 30-hour limit and no more, or below is better, right? Because work-life balance is very important to me. The time that you have to escape your brain from the problems of your work is the time that you are giving your subconscious to work on the hardest problems. And so that escape and that work-life balance is very important. And it's important, I feel like, for a company to build in rules to protect that, because otherwise it's the same slippery slope, right? You get this peer pressure to work more and more and more and more and more, and that peer pressure translates to things like burnout, and to things like not taking vacation when you need to take vacation. When if you start with the principle of giving people enough space to live their life and make their life be the primary thing instead of work be the primary thing, it sort of topsy-turvies the entire equation, and people come to work naturally motivated and naturally rested and naturally ready to solve big problems when it becomes less than the majority of their life.
Well, and also I think as a creative worker, or I mean, even especially I would think as a software developer and programming, I mean, that kind of work is super taxic on the brain.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that is what you're doing. Your product
Yeah.
is your brain power,
Yeah.
really. So yeah, and 40 hours a week is so arbitrary to begin with, right?
Yeah.
It's just
It
like
is.
random. I mean, there's some days, you know, like yesterday I was really productive, like totally
Mhm.
high, and randomly because I probably just had a whole weekend off and I dove in on Monday morning, like, all right, let's get this party
Yeah.
started. Today, less so, because I like worked 10 hours yesterday. So
Yeah.
today it's like a little, I'm like, okay, maybe I ought to save my energy since it's going to be a big week ahead. So that is one of the nice things about doing remote, of course, is you get to choose your own, but indeed in an office space, you don't get to choose your own time frame for working, or yeah, you don't get your black walnut desk
Yeah.
to spark joy, like all those
Right.
things. So I mean, work life, how many people are working at Kuvio Creative right now?
So we're now 21 people. 18 of them are full time. It's across 8 countries now. And that's been a pretty steady growth through the 4 years that we've been around.
That's pretty amazing. And so how do you guys align? Do you have some sort of a team agreement in place on like how you're going to work, or you know, like how do you get everybody using the same tools in the same way, and what did that look like for you guys
So
and
we
gals?
have, from the beginning, been very heavily invested in our internal process. Like I said, when we started, one of my biggest goals was not to just make the product that we're trying to make, but also run experiments to figure out how to be the most efficient company in a 100% remote environment. And so we have had a team dedicated full time to constantly paying attention to our internal culture and our internal process, and finding and running experiments and finding what works and finding what doesn't work. From the very beginning, Slack has been our bread and butter as far as communication is concerned. But it's not just about the tool, it's about the expectations that everybody has in the use of the tool that I think
Right.
has shown itself to be much more important. And so with Slack, we all had to learn things like we can't rely on a real-time conversation anymore, right? Like in order for everybody to be able to work when and where they want to work, we have to be okay with delays in communication. But and that's perfectly fine, right? The experiments that we've run have said that is totally fine, because when somebody logs on and they're responding to everything, the 3 or 4 hour difference or the time zone difference or whatever it is just doesn't matter in the long run, as opposed to the benefits of them being able to work where and when they want. And so the conversation is different, right? You put ideas out there and it's much more asynchronous. But once you kind of get used to it, you start sort of realizing the benefits for yourself, and start and Slack becomes, instead of a tool that you feel like you have to be logged on to 24 hours a day to constantly respond if somebody's pinging you, it becomes a different kind of tool that enables a true asynchronous chat, right? And whenever you're ready to get on and read the conversations and respond and participate, you can do that at your leisure instead of at the company's, uh, demand. And that's been really important.
Right, because you're creating space for deep work for yourself, and like the
Yes.
freedom to dip in and out when you choose. Because indeed, I mean, I've got like 4 or 5. I had to disconnect from a bunch of Slack groups. At some point, it's just too many. But
Yeah.
indeed, you could sit in front of Slack and just watch messages come in all day. I mean, that's also, you know, an option, and not very healthy or productive.
Yeah, and there are
So,
different sorts of people. Like I am perfectly okay with having Slack on 24 hours a day, because I'm okay with quickly responding everywhere I can respond to sort of keep those conversations going. But that doesn't turn into a mandate for anybody, because others are on the complete opposite other side of the spectrum, and that should also be okay. Like that's
uh-huh.
the culture, is that no matter how much or little you want to communicate, or how much or little of a delay there is in that environment, if that's what we take as the environment that is closer to the truth, how do we do big things in that environment?
Yeah, indeed. Indeed, there's a lot of benefits to that, especially because it, yeah. I mean, one of the things that's happened when most people went remote is we're in meeting overload, right?
Yes.
Like everybody just went on video and pretended like we were at the office on video. And then, yeah, but people didn't realize it's a new medium. You've
Hmm.
got to go asynchronous or you're going to go crazy because it's just not
Right.
healthy. It's not healthy in the office either, but somehow we get a little sloppier in the office with our processes and we can get by. What
Yeah,
other, oh, go ahead.
and a 10-person video Zoom meeting is also much different than a roundtable meeting in a physical office, because you are now staring at 9 faces staring right back at you, and it's a different environment, right? And you feel all of those additional pressures to, you have to get dressed, and you have to do your hair, and you have to like present yourself in a way that in the creative space just doesn't matter to the actual productivity of whatever your brain is going to come up with that day. And so it applies this particular peer pressure that I've just always sort of rebelled against.
Yeah, yeah, indeed, indeed. There's a whole bunch of that. So what are some of the other struggles that your team has encountered? What's been hard for you guys as you've gone on this 100% remote journey?
So I would say that all of the biggest struggles always revolve around communication, because there is a very easy tendency to isolate or to become isolated if you are especially new to remote environments, or even if you're, a quote veteran. I've been doing it for 4 years, but um, uh, it's when socialization is not sort of given to you and is all around you by the fact of you commuting into a workplace that is also surrounded by a bunch of people, you find yourself having to find your own path to actively communicating to not isolate yourself. And it becomes a struggle, especially for introverts like myself, because we tend to want to hermit, and if we fully hermit, we end up not being able to take advantage of the other talents that are on the team, right? To have those big conversations that bring in different angles of different people's way of thinking, that then come up with the solution in a much faster way, because we're just not used to being proactively communicating in that sense. And so it's all revolved around that. As we have grown, the major thing now is trying to figure out a way to constantly give everybody all of the context that they need, or that we want them to have for every situation that they could possibly come across, without it being entirely overwhelming, right? Like striking that balance of, we have a lot of things going on, they all tangentially affect everybody in some way, but as we continue to grow, how do we not force everybody to read 1,000-line, Slack conversations from 300 different channels? And to be honest, that's a problem that we still have not solved. We're still in the process of running experiments to figure out how to do that. I had a conversation earlier this morning with one of our newer team members, where she proposed sort of almost like a breaking news pattern, where we somehow made like a 2-minute video or audio or sort of news at the beginning of every day or every week, where we say, these are the things that are going on, right? This is the big things that are happening at Kuvio, so that oral learners can digest that information very quickly and then dive more into the information. And then we have a place for the visual learners as well. I thought that was very interesting. So that's probably an experiment that we'll run soon. That way of sort of summarizing everything, right? Doing the work to saying, these are the big things that are happening. Are you interested in any of them? Feel free to dive in. Here's where the channels are, and
right. Like one of my colleagues, Pilar Orti at Virtual Not Distant, she does internal podcasts for companies. So she'll
Yeah.
go in, like, and create a podcast for the company just to let people know, like, for those of us who are, is it oral learning that when
Mhm.
you're listening? Yeah. So if you're an oral learner, then you can listen to a podcast and catch up instead of like reading the
Right.
big company newsletter. I love that idea. I think these are
Yeah.
the kind of things, as we go more asynchronous, I think these are the kind of things that will really help a company's success. Is just a new way to transfer information.
Yeah. I
Love
completely
it.
agree.
Love it. How do you guys deal with conflict when conflict happens, or passive aggressive behavior?
Mhm.
Every team has it.
Yeah, what's interesting with our team, and I still tried to put my finger on exactly why this has been the case, but we have had probably 1% of the conflicts through our history that a typical team has. It's got to be related to the combination of experiments that we've run or whatever, but I feel like if I had to put my finger on something, it would be the just sort of radical space that we give everybody to find their own way and to find their own path. And I mean, to even bounce around and find their own role, right? Like, we don't hire for roles, we hire people and let them find what they could best contribute. And maybe the combination of that and people realizing that, hey, I can do all the things that I enjoy, and realizing that that also applies to everybody else, enables this natural sort of deferment of to other people's talents, right? Like, I know that I'm not the best at branding, right? And so I'm going to go to the branding genius of the team and ask her opinion on things, and then defer to her opinion no matter what. And that became a cultural thing, which somehow almost completely eliminated that passive aggressiveness that could potentially be related to people trying to find that power for themselves in an environment when they don't necessarily have that power, right? And so, like, we gave power by default and we trusted by default, and based off of that, like, we have never, I mean, I can count on one hand the number of true, like, managerial or HR type issues that we've had in the space of 4 years.
That's amazing, because I was going to just say, like, has anybody, taken advantage of the fact that you do have so much freedom and that you give people the space? Has that happened?
No, what happens more often is that people don't know what to do with it and they disappear for a long period of time. Especially when they're first hired, they go, this is too much responsibility, I don't know what to do with it, I'm just going to ghost you for 2 or 3 weeks. And it's like, and we've started realizing that it's a common pattern enough that we let it happen, and we're just like, give yourself time. And we know it's a lot, we know, that being like, it's all up to you, just whatever you want to do for us, that's fine, is a big jump for a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
A
Oh yeah. I
huge
mean,
jump, right? It's a lot of weight, right? But then once people go through that and then inevitably come back, and 90% of them do, they never leave after that. Like, nobody has ever quit in a huff. Like very, very few people have quit just to, like, because maybe they were an apprentice here and they found a full-time job once they graduated, or things like that, a normal sort of career move. But nobody has ever quit. Everybody that is here today has been here either from the beginning or, through the years. So
I just find it so striking, because so many managers have been hesitant to allow people to go remote, because they feel like they're not going to work and that they can't be trusted. And I mean, that's been the main sort of hesitance of managers over time. So it always strikes me that every single interview that I've done on this podcast, and I think 200, I'm not sure what number you're, 266 or 267, a lot, that has not happened to anybody yet. That is not the problem that managers need to be concerned about. What seems more the problem is that people overwork, burnout, work-life fusion. How do you guys deal with that? I mean, you've got this 30-hour full-time work week. That's pretty revolutionary, especially for the US, I should say. For Europe, they're like, oh, we've been doing this for ages, but the US hasn't. But how do you enforce it, and how do you know when people are burning out?
I mean, most of it stems from the 30-hour work week and the flex time, and really harping on that culture as like, we do not want you to go past the 30 hours. If you go past the 30 hours, let us know, because that means that there's something wrong. That means that we don't have enough people, or we need to give you, more room and more space and more, like add more people to the team, or whatever it might mean. And so a lot of it has sprung naturally from that. I personally, I have come close to burnout myself for many times, just being sort of in the founder role, where I'm like, yeah, sure, 30-hour work week is the way that things should go, and I will subscribe to that. But constantly I feel guilty when I do subscribe to that, because I'm like, there's something else that I could have done. And so if I'm feeling that, everybody is, I'm sure, feeling that. And sometimes I will break my own rules because I feel guilty, and end up feeling guiltier and realizing that, oh my gosh, I'm on the way to burnout, because I ended up, doing an all-nighter to catch up on things, and sort of breaking those tenets that I am asking everybody else to do. And so I feel like at least within our culture, it has been, or at least it seems to me to be, a largely self-correcting thing, because again of that space. If there is no pressure from the outside to work more hours, and the pressure comes from within, then it is sort of natural. It naturally becomes an internal struggle that then is shaped by, I would say, mostly peer pressure. And if your peers around you are also working 30-hour work weeks, and you're seeing people not respond on Slack, and you're seeing like those that are not burning out having a decent life balance, then I see people tend to subscribe to that and go, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm working too much, and either speaking up or sort of re-policing their own time and figuring out what their particular balance is. And it's a constant, constant journey, right? And it changes even for people. Like I'm, as I get older, I'm becoming more and more of a morning person. And sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna be work for 4 hours straight, and sometimes I'm like, I just want to work 30 minutes at a time on random days of the week and things like that. But again, I know I say a lot, but it comes down to giving time and allowing time for all of those rhythms to be developed for the individual, that I think has alleviated a lot of those issues that a lot of other companies who start with, let's try this remote experience, but let's add all these levels of bureaucracy to make sure that all of our fears are allayed, right? Of, oh my gosh, like we need to put a camera on everybody to make sure that they're not slacking off, and we need to, all these things. People are going to slack off. Like the snow days that people have, nobody ever works on snow days. Everybody pretends to work on snow days, right?
Right.
But the snow days become your mental health day in a lot of cases, because you don't otherwise have those mental health days. And so you have to give the space for that time. You have to give you have to trust that simultaneously work should not be the primary thing in life, and that people have passions that will relate to work that they want to do for the world. And so if you can attach yourself to that, as a manager or a founder of a company, then suddenly it ends up not being about how much did you work, how much time did you give me this week, how many tasks did you complete, and it's more about the general creative process, and how can we together bring our talents together to build something big, no matter how long it takes, no matter how many struggles that we face. If we're all in this together, and it's not about an arbitrary deadline, but it's instead about building the right thing, and contributing a piece of ourselves towards building the right thing. If that becomes the primary thing, then all else sort of fades away.
Yeah, it's like in Jim Collins's book From Good to Great. You got to get the right people on the bus. And once you have the right people on the bus, man, it doesn't matter where you're going to go. You're going to have a really good road trip.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's, yeah. So but it's really hard to get the right people on the bus.
It is.
So you've said something on your website that I found really interesting. You said that you want to serve as an agent of change in an industry that lacks diversity. And of course, this is a huge issue coming up right now. I mean, we're recording this in the middle of July of 2020. So the Black Lives Matter protests have been happening and are still going on. So diversity is a huge issue happening all over the world. And it seems like to me, remote is one of the great ways of helping to solve diversity and inclusion in the workplace, right? Like we hire the best people from anywhere, regardless of race or age or sex or dog people versus cat people, like whatever the diversity is. So why is this so important to you and your company in particular? And what are you guys doing to serve as these agents of change?
So, I think it comes down to the same thing that a lot of these same things that I've been talking about come down to, which is the way that things are versus the way that things could be. And the way that things are is, you know, the two jobs that I had for a total of 5 years as a software developer before starting Kuvio was full of white men, right? White men that were all being paid 6 figures a year and not really doing 6 figures a year worth of work because they were part of an entitled, privileged society that they did not recognize themselves. And so they thought that they were in this lucrative situation that they had fully earned on their own, when really they were just perpetuating a culture of bringing in more people that looked like me and acted like me and talked like me so that we can take advantage of the, you know, tech bubble of everybody will pay trillions of dollars for software and let's take a piece of that. And so again, we started, you know, I noticed that, and I, you know, had always known that obviously diversity of any kind is the thing that contributes the best possible angles of any problem to any problem that you want to face. And so we approached that from the beginning, saying not that we are going to try to be more diverse, but that we are going to just hire the best people. And not be like, you know, not have a manager of diversity to solve the problems and to move the quotas and say we're going to hire, you know, 2 people of color this year and solve the problem that way, because you don't change the underlying culture. You're just putting a band-aid on it. But instead, approaching it with the hypothesis that if you just hire the best people, your team will naturally be diverse, because the world is diverse, right? And even the US is diverse, right? Like, and so the discrepancy between software companies, or really any company, most companies in the US, and their pie chart of diversity versus the pie chart of American diversity, or the pie chart of world diversity, the discrepancy there is the most telling thing, right? And and you don't just try to get to a more diverse place by specifically hiring for diversity. You have to start back at the beginning and change your underlying culture and really figure out why it is that everybody that surrounds you in this place of business is a white man. Why is that the case? And the truth is that there is no reason for it besides the implicit biases that, you know, we all have to various degrees and that we all struggle with. But the world is full of different cultures, and beautiful cultures that are, I mean, infinitely more beautiful and have an infinitely greater history than the culture of especially the white American settler, right? Which is just a few hundred years old. And so you're losing the bulk of human history if you are ignoring and trying to hold on to, whether explicitly or implicitly, trying to hold on to a particular culture that you find yourself most comfortable in. You need to break the mold. You have to find the places where you are the most uncomfortable, because that becomes the engine of growth. And that's what we believe in. And so we've been naturally diverse, and we look at the other businesses that, you know, that have diversity initiatives, and yell loudly that we're trying to solve this problem, but kind of implicitly, we know that the problem will not be solved unless they truly start over, unless they, instead of, I saw a tweet the other day, and I forget who it was from, but somebody said that instead of hiring a coach, a diversity coach, to talk to your executive team about diversity issues, why not hire a Black woman as a member of your executive team?
Right. Well, the quote that I loved, what you said is, when you hire the best, you're naturally going to get diversity.
Yes.
If you focus on hiring the best.
Yeah.
That's just awesome. That's I think that's what people need to know. Okay, so I've got two more questions. I'm totally going way over. I've got copious notes. I'm really sorry, but I have two questions. One is remote related, one is not. But given that you are steeped in branding and web design and marketing, and when you look at most people's websites out there, they're pretty bad. I just redesigned my personal website, and she asked me, like, what other websites out there do you like? And I was looking around going, huh. Not a lot, actually. Where do people go wrong? What's like a good marketing branding tip where you see like everybody goes wrong with this?
So this is sort of the core of what we were trying to fight against, or educate, and is one of the hardest things to fight against, because I think it speaks to our natural humanity. Is when you embark upon something like branding or marketing or web design or apps or whatever, none of those things are for you. Those things are for your customers, right? And so your idea of your logo or your brand speaking to the things that you believe in, it's just not about you. Nobody cares about the story of this particular thing in the logo that, was something that intersected with some piece of my 20-year history, right? Nobody cares, and to a greater degree, nobody cares about your logo or your how you came across that, or anything relating to you in general. They care about your offering. And so the best way to combat that is to find an outside team of people and defer to their expertise, right? And that's the hardest thing, right? And so most branding agencies, for example, will do this dog and pony show where they'll say, here are 50 logos that our team has come up with. Pick the one that you like best and tweak it to your heart's content and change the colors and do all this kind of stuff to make you happy and make you feel like you are part of the design of your logo, right? But what you end up with is a bastardization of the entire principles of that branding team's initial approach to actually solving the problem, because you made it all about yourself instead of about your customers. Right. Whereas the branding team was focused on how is this going to look for the people that you were trying to reach. So that's the pivot that we're
Brilliant.
trying to educate.
Brilliant advice. I've been doing some, I had a business coach for the last year. And one of the things that also, I'm a terrible salesperson, but I've been listening to a lot of Zig Ziglar, who is, I don't know, for most people who have it, he's, because he's sort of an older generation, but he's the premier sales guy in the US. He gave all these sales, but he always said you have to listen to WIIFM radio, which stands for what's in it for me, what's in it for your customer. Nobody, like what people, I see all the time, and now that I know this language, this results-oriented language, I see it all the time. People are like, join my webinar. And I'm like, I don't care about your webinar. What's in it for me?
Right.
Like, who cares? Like,
right. And so, commercials that are like, look how great we are. We do all these things. We're this amazing company, right? Who cares? What do you do? What are you doing for me? That's the point, right?
What do I get?
It's hard for people to get outside of their own heads and put themselves into the shoes of their customers. But that's the entire point of business, right? Is to have customers that you have successfully put yourself in the shoes of and solved a problem for.
Right. You have brought value that people are worth worry or want to pay for.
Yes.
Right? Like that's the whole point. Yeah, love it. Great advice. All right, so promise last two questions. There, one's super easy, one's medium easy, and the medium one is, what advice would you give to people who are just starting out on their remote journey? You know, whether it's a company or an individual, like what would you say? Like looking back, what advice would you maybe give yourself before you had started out on your remote journey?
I think give yourself as much space as possible. I think it comes down to that. Don't rush. Don't become beholden to this idea of the grand intrigue of remote work and, oh my gosh, this is going to be better if only I could just be at home and lose my commute. And sure, all of those things are true, but you're entering into a different environment that's going to take time to find your natural rhythm. And so don't rush it, right? Listen to yourself, spend time running different experiments, seeing how things feel. And even if you're in a situation where you're in a team where that is either being forced to be remote because now we have the pandemic, or is has started to naturally move towards being remote, and you have managers that are a little bit more bureaucratic, try your best not to latch on to, I'm going to try and make myself seem as productive as possible so I don't lose this opportunity to be remote. Because that is what's going to lead to burnout and never get you to solve the real problems that will let you be remote for the next 10 years of your life, right? So give yourself as much time as you possibly can. Don't worry about productivity from the very beginning. You're going to completely suck at it for months. I mean, months.
It's true.
And then even now, right? There are entire weeks where I completely suck at it, where I do almost nothing. But you just have to listen to yourself and realize that there is a reason why you're not being productive, because we all know how it feels to wake up and be naturally productive. And that time will come if you allow yourself the space to not be productive.
Yeah. And don't worry about being too lazy. Most of us are just not that lazy. There's very few George Costanzas in the world, you know, it's just,
right. But we all just hide it. We all pretend that we are productive, robots that work magically 60 hours a week, but we're all lying to ourselves. The CEOs that say, I work 80 to 100-hour weeks, if you really follow them, 60 of those 80 hours are just doing their own thing and just doing it in a suit and tie so that they're counting it as work hours.
Right. Like, let's look at the reality of what's going on. Yeah. All right. Last easy question, which is, when people want to find out more information about you and your company, what is the best place to look? Where can you be found?
So our company website is www.kuv.io. You can add a /contact to that to get in touch with us. Me personally, my email is joseph@kuviocreative.com. Feel free to email me directly as well. I love to have deep philosophical conversations about remote work and about really any industry issue that you may be going through, because that can only help both of us, right? Like, if there are new angles of things that we have not yet encountered, we would love to help solve those problems for you as well. So,
and if you need a new website and branding and marketing and web design, don't do it alone. Do not get professionals to help you. I'm just realizing as I look at everybody else's website, like, oh my God. Yeah, for those of you saying the same thing about collaborationsuperpowers.com in July of 2020, it's on the way to being redeveloped. So you wait until August. So, okay, Joseph, it has been a real pleasure. Thanks for taking so much time today. I know I said it would be 25 minutes, and here we are at 50 minutes exactly.
Oh, wow.
But so apologies, but yeah, if you have nice things to say, I'm not going to cut off the interview just for time's sake. So, because my podcast, my rules, so it's super fun. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, until next time, be powerful.